Hi everyone. Today we are going to be reading chapters 9 and 10 of I Survived the Destruction of Pompeii, and I'm very excited to pick up where we left off with Marcus and Tata. First, I have a few shout outs for you. We do. Roy, what are our shout outs today? Anyone that there's a squirrel he was very interested in yesterday that we would like to shout out to. But also to LJ, to Mr. Lofink's third grade, to Asa, to the Jedi, fourth grade Jedis, to Mrs. Wardell's GMS Pirates, hi Peggy, to Miss Smith's Nick Ream third grade Tigers, and to Leah in Albuquerque. So hi to all you guys. So one of the things I wanted to do today is pick up where we left off, not only in the plot, but what we were doing in our quest last time. So the quest that I gave to you, Roy is not interested in the quest, but you will be. So last time we talked about foreshadowing, which is a technique, a craft that authors use in their writing to build suspense. I give you little hints that something might be happening. I don't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but I try to create a mood where you think, something strange or scary or exciting might be happening soon. So in the last quest, I asked you to look back on chapters 7 and 8 and think about how I used foreshadowing. Now I want you to think about it in this chapter. Now that you know what foreshadowing is, I want you to be alert as you're listening to signs of when I am maybe giving you a little hint that something's going to happen. Okay, here we go. We are in chapter 9. It was close. No, actually, let me just remind you where we were. Papa and Tata were on the mountain. They had escaped from they had made their escape, and now they were on Vesuvius. And remember, they don't really know. No one knows that Vesuvius is a volcano yet, because volcanoes they weren't known in the ancient Roman times. Scientists hadn't yet discovered how the earth worked. So there were all these mysterious things going on, but they didn't know what they were. So now it's the middle of the night, and Marcus is Papa's sound asleep. The moon is full. Let's see where we were. Okay. It was close to dawn when Marcus finally fell asleep, and right away he tumbled into a dream. He was on a quest with Hercules to kill the monstrous Hydra, an enormous serpent with 9 heads. Just one puff of her poisonous breath could kill. Marcus waded silently through the dark and misty swamp, pushing aside sharp stalks of grass. Now he's dreaming here. This is all happening in his dream. And then just ahead, there she was, the hideous serpent. Marcus stopped, frozen as the beast rose up from the swamp. One by one, her 9 horrific heads emerged from the mist, staring at him with yellow, glowing eyes, leering with dripping, glistening fangs. Here is a picture that Scott drew for you. And then, huff! A burning, rotten stench rushed into Marcus's lungs. The poisonous Hydra breath. Marcus gagged and coughed. His throat burned. His chest felt like it would explode. Marcus! Marcus! A voice called. Hercules? Marcus! Marcus's eyes popped open, and the nightmare fell away. Tata was kneeling next to him, calling his name, shaking him awake. It was all a dream. Relief poured over him as he realized that he wasn't in the swamp with the Hydra. He was on the mountain Vesuvius with Tata. But wait, something was terribly wrong. The air was still poisonous. The Hydra was still puffing gusts of her burning breath into Marcus's lungs. But there was no Hydra. That burning poisonous smell was here. Marcus, Tata choked. Get up, the air has gone bad. Tata helped pull Marcus to his feet, and they staggered toward Peg. Marcus's head pounded. Tears poured from his stinging eyes. His lungs were on fire, and he gasped for breath. He felt dizzy. They couldn't last much longer in this air. Peg was rearing in panic, white foam spewing from her mouth. Tata fumbled with her rope, finally untying it. They all stumbled out of the grove of trees where the air was miraculously clear. Tata and Marcus collapsed to the ground, gulping the fresh air into their lungs. Tata, Marcus rasped. What was that? Oh, sulfur gas, Tata replied, his voice ragged from coughing. There's no doubt I smelled it once before when Linus and I were visiting a gold mine in Africa. We were deep underground. Sulfur gas can be deadly. It can kill in minutes. We barely made it to the surface in time. Tata looked into the grove of trees. It's highly unusual to find sulfur gas above the ground, he said. He stood and climbed onto a boulder that jutted out of the grassy slope. Looking all around, Marcus saw a hint of worry in his father's eyes, but mainly what he saw was curiosity, a hunger to learn and understand. It was the same look Tata used to get in Linus Silius's library when he was chasing down a new theory. Suddenly, Tata wasn't a slave on the run. He was a scientist lurking for answers. And the truth was that after spending a lifetime working with Linus, Tata probably knew more about science and nature than most people in the entire Roman Empire. In recent years, Linus would ask Papa to join him when important guests came, eager for friends to hear Tata's ideas. Tata hopped down from the boulder now. He held out his hand to Marcus, pulling him to his feet. Let's keep heading up the mountain, he said, handing Marcus Peg's rein. We'll discover more when we get to the top. Tata set out, climbing the rocky path. Marcus took a deep breath and gave Peg's reins a tug, but the mare wouldn't budge. She looked at Marcus with her wise brown eyes. Her expression was so thoughtful. Marcus would not have been shocked if she had opened her mouth and started to speak to him. What is it? Marcus said. The mare looked up the mountain. She stamped her foot. You don't want to go up there, do you? Snort. Me either, Marcus said. Tata's voice shouted out, Marcus! Marcus and Peg eyed each other. We can't let Tata up there by himself, Marcus said. Peg made a noise that sounded like a sigh, and she stepped forward. Together they followed Tata toward the top of Vesuvius. So maybe there was a little foreshadowing there that I gave. Peg didn't want to go up to the top of Vesuvius. I don't know why. All right, here's chapter 10. So now it's 7 a.m., and they're still on the mountain of Vesuvius. They took the twisting path that wound up the mountain. The sun was barely up, but already it roasted their backs. Tata kept stopping to look around. He seemed to be taking the mountain apart with his eyes, inch by inch. He kept crouching down, scooping up handfuls of soil, rubbing it between his fingers. He ripped up pieces of grass, sniffing them, and even touching them to his tongue. Do you notice the quiet? He said. There are no birds or insects anywhere. Tata was right. Normally in this time of the morning, the air would be alive with chirping and singing and chattering, but Marcus had not seen one creature since they came up the mountain. Not a deer, a squirrel, not even a fly, no people either. There were pastures on this side of Vesuvius, and they'd passed 2 shepherd shacks, but they hadn't seen a soul. Where did they all go? Marcus said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. It might be that there's not enough water, Tata said. It could be that the heat drove them off. They'd already discovered that the streams higher up in the mountain were mysteriously dried up. They'd managed to find just one that still ran, and the trickle of water tasted so foul they could barely choke it down. Peg wouldn't go near it, even though she'd barely had a drink before they'd slept that night. Maybe that was why she was walking so slowly, why she kept stopping and stamping her feet. But now, as they passed through a cluster of pine trees, Peg stopped short. Tata pulled her rope, but she refused to move. Marcus gave her a pat. Come on, Peg, he said. The mare refused to budge. She looked at Marcus with her wide, fearful eyes. Nay! Was she trying to warn them about something? Marcus found the answer when he peered through the trees into a meadow. The first thing he noticed was that the grass was brown, as though it had been burned. Then he saw the sheep, at least 20 of them, all splayed out on their backs or sides. Marcus knew right away that they were all dead. Good Jupiter! Tata whispered in shock, stepping slowly into the field. Once again, Marcus had to force himself to follow his father. Tata crouched down next to one of the sheep. There's not a mark on her, Tata said, laying a gentle hand over the poor creature's head. It was true. There was not a speck of blood, no bite marks, no wounds at all. But her tongue bulged out of her mouth, and her eyes were wide with agony. All the sheep looked the same. What could have killed them? Tata said a prayer in his old Germanic language and then stood up. I've seen enough, he said. We must leave here now. As they turned, there was a slow rumbling from deep inside the earth. It quickly rose to a roar as the ground began to shake. Marcus half expected a great beast to burst through the soil, for a giant clawed hand to grab him around the throat. What he saw next was almost more horrifying. As the ground boiled, the field suddenly ripped apart right in front of them. The gaping crack looked like an evil, smiling mouth ready to devour them. Great chunks of earth and dead sheep tumbled into the blackness. Marcus and Tata staggered back, and then, boom! An explosion shattered the air. Fire leapt out of the crack, a massive flaming tongue that seemed to lick the sky and then disappear. The force of the blast knocked them over and sent Marcus tumbling down the slope. He rolled and twisted, his neck cracking, his arms tangling, his face scraping the rocky dirt as he slid down the hill. He crashed into a tree, which knocked every bit of air out of his lungs. Finally, the ground stopped shaking. The fire was gone. But now ash rained down on them, a silent blizzard of hot flakes. Marcus sat there, numb with terror, dizzy from his fall. Tata came hurtling down the hill with Peg. "Are you hurt?" he gasped, dropping to his knees next to Marcus. Marcus shook his head dumbly, slowly rising to his feet. Moments later, they were speeding down the mountain on Peg. The mare ran like she had the day before, her hooves barely touching the ground. Finally, Tata spoke. "A terrible fire is burning under the mountain," he warned. "I believe the entire mountain will explode." Marcus was too stunned to speak or even think. All he could hear was a ragged voice whispering in his mind. It was that beggar woman that he'd met earlier. He heard her voice now. "This world will burn." All right, well, that's the end of chapter 11. And now I want you to stand by for today's quest. For today's quest, I want you to think again about foreshadowing. I want you to think about, were there any points in these last two chapters where I did some of that foreshadowing that we talked about earlier? And I also want you to start to think about my characters, Marcus and Tata and Festus, the people that you've met so far in the story. What are some adjectives? What are some words that you would use to describe Marcus? And what are some words that you would use to describe Tata? And what are some examples from either these past two chapters or some of the chapters that you've listened to before that made you decide that those words were right for those characters? So what I would do is, you can re-listen to chapters that I've already read. You don't have to feel as though everything has to be already, stuck in your head. Or maybe from these last two chapters, certainly we know a bit about Tata from how he has acted on the mountain. What are some words? I'm very curious to think about what words you might come up with. I think you should write down some words that describe each of those two characters, and then some examples from the chapters that support that. And I will be very excited to see you next time for our next two read-alouds. So thank you so much for joining me.